evening. Today's Wednesday, March 13th, 2024, approximately 5:30 p.m. This is the Town of Auburn Finance Committee. This evening's agenda, we have a call to order fiscal year 25 budgets for the Police Department, Fire Rescue Department, and the Emergency Management Department. Vote on a couple transfers, review of some past transfers, minutes, then we'll adjourn. Let me first read the remote participation script. As of July of 2023, this open meeting of the Town of Auburn Finance Committee is being conducted both in person and remotely, consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, which suspends the requirements of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed to participate remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, it's 1-786-535-3211, and they need to utilize an access code of 991-599-357. Or the public can join via their computer at global.gotomeeting.com/join, same access code as the phone number, which is 991-599-357. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Although everybody is appearing in person today, let me just do a quick roll call. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ed Coleman?
Here.
Patrick Jones?
Here.
And Stephen Consilvio? Here. Town officials and employees participating, call your name, please respond in the affirmative. CFO Town Accountant Karen Harnois?
Here.
And Administrative Assistant Sharon Kwiatkowski?
Here.
Okay. We'll get right into this then. So our first department budget that we're going to discuss tonight is the police department budget. We'll cover their budget and their section of the CIP. Please remind me so we don't buzz by that. Thank you. Chief, Deputy Chief, you're welcome to, we've got plenty of room up here apparently now, so you're welcome to join us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Well, Chief, would you like to read the amounts requested or go over highlights, or would you like to go over the highlights of your budget, or how would you like to?
I think we'd like to go over the highlights of the budget, if that would be okay.
Absolutely.
I can tell you that I give credit where credit's due, and my deputy chief puts in countless hours handling the administrative side of this, and he put a lot of effort into this year's budget. And so from here, I'll read you a few bullet points. The fiscal year 25 total increase was $312,000. To be specific, $311,990. Out of that, $221,504 were salary increases that we were obligated to have. I have a note here, and I will say this respectfully, and I want this board to know that we feel very supported by the town of Auburn, the members of the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, FinCom. We have always felt very supported by you folks, and you've always listened to us. We had made a request this year. It was a significant ask of adding more patrolmen, 4 more patrolmen, correct? Mm-hmm. And then a lieutenant, a watch commander, a third shift lieutenant that is going to be largely in charge of our body worn camera program, and we're inching much closer to an agreement with patrolmen. I'm very confident that that will come to fruition very soon. But learning what the outlook was with the Commonwealth and what was going to be disseminated to the town of Auburn and other communities, we essentially listened to the town manager, and we have understood, and we are not going to push for the 4 other patrolmen at this time until we have a better financial outlook for the town of Auburn. However, I sat with the town manager, and I told him how adding the 3rd lieutenant was a critical position for us. We've been supported by this board and others for the accreditation and for the body worn camera program and grant that we received. And the bullet point that I have here is adding that 3rd lieutenant will allow for that added layer of supervision, watch commander on the overnight shift to replicate what we've already accomplished on the 2 other shifts. And the 3rd lieutenant is needed to balance out our administrative duties to include serving as accreditation manager and body-worn camera oversight, which is going to be a large task. I can tell you this is good news. Our supervisory overtime went from 94,000 before realignment to 89,000. So we have realized a real savings by having that day lieutenant and the afternoon lieutenant, because when a sergeant may be off of vacation or leave time or training, that watch commander has taken over that role without necessitating a need to fill that shift with overtime. Scott, I'll let you expand on some of these other smaller bullet points. Go.
Well, generally speaking, one of the largest increases obviously is the body-worn camera storage. That goes from essentially a 0. It was funded at 16,000 after the fall town meeting, but that goes to 37, and that's what the full year's cost for that is. Meetings and education, I'm sure you saw, are increased by $20,000, but that's based on conducting an assessment center process for all ranks, so sergeant, lieutenant, deputy, and chief. And, as the chief and I have discussed, having a succession plan in place is extremely important. And, when the previous chief left, we were kind of left in, a little bit of a strange spot where we had, extended acting periods of time, period where people were in provisional positions and there were no active lists to draw from. So, we absolutely believe that, some level of competition, it keeps the guys sharp and it keeps them, thinking about the future and or their futures, and they start to act a little bit, more for those positions. So $20,000, excuse me, in meetings and education is just for the cost of the assessment center, because approximately 2 years ago it was 18,000, so 20,000 may even be a little on the low side. Technology support's up $15,000, but that's based on Xerox leases, and I think, I've been before the finance committee before and mentioned our costs associated with our IT support. Just today, we got quotes from another, we've tried to, follow through with that and get other quotes from other companies. There aren't as many companies out there as I thought that did public safety IT support. I mean, I suppose we could expand it beyond just public safety, but I was a little disappointed with the quote that came in today. It's not much of a savings over GDS, unfortunately, so we have to go back to the drawing board with that a little bit, but as of right now, GDS is our primary IT.
If I could just comment on that, Deputy, this is IT support and firewall support is critical. I'm sure we've all seen articles in the paper. I have fellow chiefs in other communities, Shane Woodson, the town of Southbridge. They had malware attack within their organization, and it shut them down for a great period of time, where they could not access their data and they had to pay ransom. And it's just how it works. And I was actually surprised as I learned about this, that these bad actors actually negotiate with these communities to figure out what's an affordable fee to get your data back. So I don't think my deputy chief complains about a bill more than GDS and more than that, because it fluctuates. It fluctuates, but we've been very fortunate. We have not been the victim of a malware attack at this point in time. So I just wanted to kind of focus in on that and let the board know how important it is that we have adequate IT support.
So as referenced, or as the chief just said, last year, global data went up almost 9%, and they announced it in May to us, so it wasn't really even accounted for in FY24. So we're trying to account for that in FY25, and they've indicated to us there will be no increases as of right now, but I don't know if they even know, our person, I don't know if he's even aware what he's our rep, but I don't know if he controls any of that. You know, and I don't want to be a broken record like probably mostly every other department's been up here, but, you know, the cost of everything going up. Although when we get to CIP, there is a cost of something that's actually going down, so that was a pleasant surprise. But dues for, you know, Central Mass Chiefs, SEMLEC, our dues for our regional services with, you know, SWAT, drone, crash recon, motorcycle, that went up 25% this year alone. So they hadn't gone up in many years, but they all went up. So, and then, you know, firearm stipends, education stipends that weren't accounted for are now accounted for. And, you know, I had previously, we have a Motorola annual maintenance contract. It's a little over $5,000 for our portable radios, as well as some subscriptions for crash reconstruction equipment and like the speed signs that you see around town or the digital, any of those digital boards, they all come with recurring annual costs. So it's more or less the highlights for the actual 25 budget. If you have any questions you do have, obviously we'll take.
I had a question on the ransomware problem, because I was listening to a news report of that recently. Who's paying for that? Is that part of the GDS? They're only providing technical background, and then we're buying insurance somewhere else to cover the ransom? How does that?
The ransomware that occurred, or the ransom attack rather, that occurred in Southbridge was they went after the records management package, which was through Central Square, formerly known as IMC. One of the quotes that we got today was for a virtual, like a cloud-based housing of IMC. I was a little disappointed that Mr. Marshall wasn't here because I was kind of hoping that he would have some, input into that.
Wheelhouse.
Yeah, it is too, and it's I don't know enough about whether or not the cloud is. I guess I'm kind of old-fashioned, so I prefer like physical on-site servers because I feel if something gets attacked in that sense, you can unplug it and stop the attack. I guess I don't understand the cloud, so maybe that's part of my problem or misunderstanding with it. But we have a company lined up that can migrate us to the cloud. I want to be assured of the security of it, And as far as paying, GDS wouldn't pay that. They're just doing upkeep. When it comes to an actual ransom, it would be the town,
So you don't know who pays the ransom?
The
Like,
town,
the town
would, yeah.
The
Town definitely pays.
The town pays it directly.
Right.
It's not, there's no insurance for that.
And is there insurance for that? I believe there is. I remember the town manager mentioning that there was insurance for that.
Yes, we do have an insurance policy for that.
I can tell you that because I specifically mentioned Southbridge, they have the same records management system that we do. So we don't want to be like Southbridge. We don't want them to infiltrate us. GDS has been good to us, but they have no apprehension to sending us a bill. And their costs have been, I shouldn't say all over the place, but it's been very hard to manage and prepare for when they go up in their costs. I think they're based out of Pembroke, but they're in other locations across the country. We recently, as yesterday, the deputy, myself, and my IT person, we're very fortunate. We have a police officer that's much smarter than we are when it comes to computers and software and IT support. And he sat in on the Zoom call with this particular company based out of Bellingham. And they've been around for a while. They manage Millbury. I talked with the chief from Millbury yesterday, and he said that's all he's ever known. I asked if he had any negative comments to say, and he didn't, but he said that's all they've ever known. They have a few departments from around our area, some bigger ones in Rhode Island, but we didn't realize a significant savings versus GDS, who we're currently with now. So we just wanted to acknowledge to the board that we recognize that this is a significant cost in our annual budget, and we're paying attention to it.
Additional questions, Patrick?
No, I think I hear everybody loud and clear, and I think this whole cyber thing, I know from my experience, insurance companies are twofold. It's a double-edged sword. We have cyber insurance. But in order to acquire that insurance, you have to have low incidence and you have to prove that you're training your staff. So on the front line, you've got a whole group of employees that work not only for the police department, but for the whole city or town in this case, that are having to be diligent and alert. And, at some point, like they're saying, no matter how hard we try, you've got to be careful. And if we're paying a low premium because we're doing our due diligence, if there is something, if we don't pay it as a ransomware, we're going to pay it through insurance. Somewhere along the line, when an attack happens, there's going to be a charge. So I just think that merits saying that something's got to give, because we're paying, like you said, there's been this large increase. There was a time when we really didn't need it. And now, just to protect ourselves, we're being held ransom just to keep up with the people that are trying to attack us. So that's really my own observation, but I agree with the gentleman sitting here representing the police department, the chief and the lieutenant, I believe. Is that the proper title?
Chief.
Assistant. Well, I wasn't sure if they were equal, so I apologize. I don't know that.
It's okay.
Yeah.
One wrong guy.
Not going to worry about it. I meant no
One
harm
less.
by it. But my point is that they've got a tall order in front of them, because computers run their staff, computers run their department, and computers are protecting Auburn. And so it's something we've really got to pay attention to.
Agreed.
Ed, anything? I just have a question. So the meetings and ed, that is some of your SEMLEC costs? Is that the largest increase there? What was that?
The increase in meetings and education was around $20,000 increased over last year, and that's based on the projected or anticipated cost of the assessment center.
That's your second.
We're not going to be able to run the assessment center until sometime probably in January, because we have a patrol officer who's on a year-long deployment overseas. So in order to be fair, we want him to come back before we run, because he's eligible to take the sergeant's promotion. So we don't want to have to proffer that overseas, it just.
And through the chair to the board, just for more edification about the assessment center, when my predecessor left a couple of years ago, he finished up on January 31st, and I took over on February 1st. There was no budgeted item for the assessment center to go through the process through civil service, to make promotions, the testing process. So I had to go to the previous town manager and the CFO at the time, Ed Kasanovich, with my hand out, telling them that we had no money to make these promotions and to fill these empty slots. The chief of police, the deputy chief, lieutenants, and sergeants. That came with a cost. And we're doing our due diligence. I'm certainly not announcing my retirement this evening, but I've been on the job since 1987, and I probably won't be here in another 5 years. I can give the board that little clue, and I probably won't be here in another 5 years. And we're trying to get ahead of the game, because if I leave and then there's a position for chief, there may or may not be a position for deputy chief. There'll definitely be a position for lieutenant. There'll definitely be a position for sergeant. So we'll be testing for all ranks, basically duplicating what we did a couple of years ago. So we tried to get ahead of it so the board understood that this was the process.
Well, just for clarity, and again, I just realized, and I was looking at the different set of count codes, so I apologize, it is deputy chief, and I took my eye off because I was focused on cybersecurity. It's okay. But to that point, is the whole intent of the position currently for succession planning and not to keep the position of deputy chief intact? I just want to be careful.
I'm sorry, can you just explain?
I'm saying, is the intent of the current budget just strictly succession planning? Or once a chief steps, I would think if we pull a deputy chief into a role, and then that role would need to be replaced. Is this succession planning, or are you alluding to the fact that this may go away?
Well, truth be told, and I'll never lie to the board, I think that if I leave, the guy sitting to my left would be a great selection, because that would be my pick. But it's both. It's succession planning, anticipating vacancies, and planning for that. We currently have a civil service list that's in existence that we requested an extension on, but it's old. and it's time to get a new list. We have a whole new group of employees that are eligible to test and potentially promote up. And that's kind of where we're at. And we would not be holding this test until probably January. Like I said, we have a legal obligation, especially with our deployed officers, to give them that same opportunity. I've seen other communities that have made that mistake where they've promoted and not given someone deployed the opportunity. But again, they have a legal right, and we have an obligation to make that available to them just because they're serving our, even though they're serving our country, and rightly so. So does that answer your question?
To answer my question, I think what I wanted to allude to is
Position
it
is
took a
gonna
lot
stay.
to get a deputy chief position into the budget. I would be quick not to state that it could step aside if in time you move on and someone moves up. You would probably still need that support, giving the complexity.
110%, Mr. Jones.
So I don't want to allude to the fact that you're dismissing it when you retire.
Correct. No, 110%. Probably one of the best decisions that I ever made when there was an interest with the town of Auburn to ask me to remain on with Chief Lucas's departure was to ask for my deputy chief. He has certainly stepped into the role and outperformed my expectations. And I think he demonstrates that with his
Punching me in the nose when I say it.
he's not going to do that. He's gentle. He may look angry, but he's gentle.
Just to clarify, and we've gone a little bit off topic here with
Right.
the chief and deputy chief positions. This assessment center is for sergeants and lieutenants.
It would be for chief,
all the way up.
deputy chief, lieutenant, and sergeant, correct?
But would we use all of this money this year, or would we assess?
We want to have active lists for all the ranks in the event of a retirement or, in the event of a retirement. I mean, the lists are good for at least 2 years. You can get a 1-year extension, so it gives us a 3-year window to work within potentially, so.
My other question was body cam storage. So it's listed on our sheets under FY '24.
Go ahead.
Did we already approve some monies?
The amount that was appropriated for FY '24 was 16,000. Originally, it was a zero. We went to fall town meeting and changed it to 16,000 because at the time, we anticipated implementing the program in the beginning of January, and we prorated a half a year, essentially, of body cam storage. In the successive years, I believe it's another 4 years of the contract with Motorola, it's 37,000 the first year. It goes down, I think, to 34 or 35,000 the second year. It fluctuates, but it's essentially $35,000+ for each successive year.
Oh, it's up above. Thank you. One's bolded down below and then the current years. So just out of curiosity, is Motorola starting the clock when we implement? Or are we paying for storage that we're not utilizing because we haven't started?
We have not paid. Currently, I ran a year-to-date before I left the office, actually, and it's still exactly 16,000. We haven't incurred any cost at all. So that number it should be reduced, I would assume. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get the cameras up and running by, I hope May 1st. I'd like to say April 1st, but we'll say May 1st for now, just to be cautious, I guess. But, so we should only incur 2 months' worth, so it should be reduced. It's a prorated amount. So
We have 99% of the equipment and the technology. The departments received the training. We're ready to go, and under advice from town council, we're trying to wrap up the impact bargaining, which is a requirement of the grant, and we're this close. I'm being optimistic, we're this close. So we're looking forward to it. I know my officers are looking forward to implementing the program and having the body-worn cameras, and that's just part of it.
And my last question for this one is, typically in other years, we've looked at the department's request and see where town administration has shaved off in the hopes that, as monies become available, we can sort of, through requests, or it doesn't seem that like this is going to be that year. So I can appreciate that you've, made some tough decisions along with the town manager when you've come in. Is there anything of highlight here out of your request, other than the 4 positions? Obviously, that's a big one. Are there any others that, certainly if you were to come back, if there were to be a saving somewhere else, that you would sort of highlight for us now to say, that would be my $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to,
Sorry. Yeah. I would honestly, I think getting those bodies, getting those patrol bodies, and the reason we asked for 4 was, obviously we run 3 shifts, it would add one body to each shift. And then the additional body would be, we would plan to augment the detective unit by another detective, and that's based just on their workload and, some of just the amount of cases that they're dealing with and responding to. So that was what the ultimate goal was, 1 across each shift, and then a full-time detective, another full-time detective. And as you see, we reduced the full year lieutenant down to a quarter year lieutenant. So it starts April. And that should line up okay with the assessment center timing and establishing the lists.
We could talk your ear off on personnel needs. I can tell you, based on my history with the agency and the department and Scott's, we have been at a minimum staffing of 3 and 1 for a long time. A sergeant, a supervisor with 3 patrolmen. I'm sure you've heard me talk about my biggest request from my citizens of Auburn has been traffic enforcement. The call volume that we have, the officers are spending, the calls are more complicated, they're spending more times on calls, and to have the availability of additional officers to cover traffic enforcement and to be out there during the commutes and trying to make changes to improve public safety has been a challenge. Like I said, we're not deaf to the fiscal responsibility of the town, the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and with regards to what they're going to get with reimbursements. We know the migrant issue has been a tremendous cost to the Commonwealth and across the country. We're not deaf to that, but we were trying to make some changes based on statistical analysis and what our ability has been to actually address the concerns that we have and our citizens have. We've been very grateful to be able to implement our second SRO, which has been a tremendous success with our school systems. It's been a tremendous success that we are partnered very strongly with the school department in the town of Auburn, and Dr. Chamberlain has been super supportive. And that added position to the department, I followed through with my promise to be able to place that person in place. And I'm sure the board remembers me last year mentioning we wanted to increase our personnel so I could add a second traffic officer that was assigned to the afternoon shifts, because we all know the afternoons is a busy commute time and there's a lot of traffic on the road. And we know where our crashes are. They're at our major intersections on Southbridge Street and Route 20. And to be able to implement and deploy that. So that was one of the reasons for the ask, but I wanted the board to understand that we recognize the fiscal constraints from the town. We are not deaf to that.
I guess just one last one for myself. Overtime, which is always sort of a projection, it's a projection. The 325 you had requested, was that based upon those 4 additional positions? And now I see 250, which is, closer to the, it's actually lower than the 3-year average. How are we doing there? Positions that are, people that are out? I mean, where is overtime?
This is our first year, with cutting the dispatchers or the communication sections out on their own. So that was the reason for the original decrease from, I think, 250 to the 195. I can tell you as of right now, we have 30,000 left, which it's not going to be enough, I know already, to get through the rest of the year, because, there's some special events coming up between Little League Parade, Memorial Day Parade, fireworks at the end of June, as well as, increased leave time and whatnot. So I already know that that's not going to be enough. And I think it's always been the case. We do everything we can, as the chief mentioned, the restructuring with the command staff, it definitely saved money right out of the gate within the first 6 months. And we've seen a trend where it's going to continue to save 22,000, I think, about projected for this year over a full year. But yeah, I mean, the 250, it's an increase, but again, you're dealing with increased rates of pay. So, that amount of money doesn't go as far. It doesn't give you as many hours of overtime. We've been We are participating in the Route 20 speed enforcement project, which we've been putting on 4 extra shifts for that. And I keep a running, basically, document of the reasons that we are filling overtime over the course of the year. And I can tell you right now, we have the officer who's on a year-long deployment. We have 2 officers out, IOD, knee injuries right now, one of which is projected at least to be a minimum of 8 weeks more. So you end up having to fill his shifts sometimes, and then regular training obligations. So, I try to keep track of it, and I lean on the operations lieutenant and the scheduling lieutenant as much as I can to, really stick to the rules and let's not, we try to be as frugal and, cautious and careful as we can be, but unfortunately, it's just part of running the department. There's always going to be those costs.
You mentioned, just because you brought up the Route 20 initiative, those things are typically grant funded, right? So is EUPS?
That one's not.
That one's not. That one's not. And your organization actually reached out to us because we were on the Route 20 corridor, and the enforcement effort that the deputy chief is speaking about goes across the country, and there's delineated dates that any communities across the country from coast to coast are involved in proactive and visible enforcement on Route 20 to decrease deaths and traffic crashes and injuries. And knowing we have significant real estate in the town of Auburn on Route 20, and knowing what our crash statistics are, we felt it was important, and I felt it was important to participate in that with the Mass State Police and hundreds of other agencies across the country that Route 20 passes through.
Anything else? Okay, so for the police department this year for FY '25, the department had requested $5,528,946. The town manager's recommendation was $5,115,567. That is an increase over last year, over the FY '24 budget of $311,990, a 6.49% increase.
Motion to approve?
Motion to recommend.
Yeah, motion to recommend?
To recommend.
We have a motion to recommend and
Second?
a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
We want to do the CIP while they're here?
Yeah, I was just gonna hit the dispatch real quick, and then we'll get there. So we can stay on the budget end of things. So dispatch is Public Safety Dispatch 215 in your book.
It's in the, actually, it's two,
It's 215, yeah.
15?
it just says public safety dispatch. It doesn't-
They're 215.
It's
yeah.
just after 210,
Yes.
just behind it.
Okay, so this one is, can you just for the folks that are watching, just remind how this is now
Absolutely.
separated out?
So the communications department is, the public safety dispatchers, they share police and fire dispatch, EMS dispatch, so they serve obviously the Auburn Fire Rescue Department as well as the police department. They're housed in our building currently. We're funded for 11 total positions. We've had a very difficult time maintaining even 8, quite frankly. It's been difficult to fill those positions in general. The fire department was gracious enough last year to, use other funding sources to fund those 2 extra positions. And we're planning to try and, we budgeted for the 11. And, in the overtime, luckily, their overtime is augmented significantly by the support and incentive grant, which pays for about $60,000 or more in overtime, to backfill dispatch. And then there's a training grant that also allows for backfilling for them to attend training. But we knew last year when we first cut the dispatch section out into its own org and, into its own budget, we kept it bare bones, just as the dispatchers, the communications director salary, overtime, and communications oversight, and I believe longevity was included in that. And we knew that over the course of subsequent fiscal years, we were going to continue to build it out as far as adding, lines that are necessary. Because currently, like you'll notice this year versus last year, there's a miscellaneous service line, there's a training line, and there's a clothing line. So the dispatchers get a $300 clothing allowance. That's based on obviously 300 times 11. So, and as far as miscellaneous services, that covers, or that will hopefully cover, We send them for physicals, pre-employment physicals, because currently that's paid for out of the police budget, and/or their uniform shirts, sweatshirts, all get embroidered. We currently pay for that as well, and embroidery is a lot more expensive than you would think, believe it or not. So we were just trying to bring the budget into a reality situation where it actually represents what the costs are affiliated with running the center. Her overtime budget right now, that overtime budget currently right now is actually in pretty decent shape. But like I said, the grant offsets a lot of that. But we've done everything we can, I think, as far as being creative to try and fill those positions and retain those people. But you'll notice that the salary line actually went down from this year to next year, and that's basically because there's out of the dispatchers that are currently in there, I think 4 of them are in their first year. Or they have 12 months or less experience. A couple of them had experience previously, but we're paying a lower rate for these people. We have one dispatcher that's been with us for 15 years. The next closest person has been with us for 15 or 16 months. And it just goes down from there. So we have a lot of new people. I think the fire chief and deputy fire chief would probably agree, and I'm sure Mary Ann would say the same, Ms. O'Connor would say the same thing. They do a great job, and we're doing the best we can, and she's doing a great job, and we're trying to kind of get everybody, moving in the same direction and on the same sheet of music. But it's not an easy job, and it's a hard job to retain people at, unfortunately. And I don't know if that's an environmental thing or if that's...
We're not the only community that are dealing with this. It's kind of a dirty phrase, but these departments, they're pillaging from one community to the other, hoping to offer the best work environment, competitive pay, training, et cetera, recognizing that they are true first responders that are sitting there, they're the first line of communication with the public during critical incidents. So we're trying to get there. We're working hard. We're making some progress, and hopefully this is the year that we get up to full complement, because the people that work there know that those added positions, they're going to be working the swing shifts, are going to make it easier. I'm proud to say that some of my police officers that were in communications and dispatch before they started their careers have maintained their skill set, have maintained their certifications, and they've been jumping in, grabbing some of these open shifts. Because my full-time shifts weren't completely filled, I negotiated with the union membership to see if they would agree with letting part-timers fill some of those shifts, either 4 or 8-hour shifts, and that's been happening, rather than money just sitting there and with people that were willing to work in these positions. So we're trying to be as creative as possible, and hopefully we'll be there this year.
So yeah, it's just quickly, I mean, obviously the actual salary line went down. The communications director is a COLA. Training didn't exist. Miscellaneous services didn't exist, and the clothing line did not exist in the budget prior to. So those are all, the 750 is level. The longevity, there's only one person that's actually eligible for longevity, and that's the 15-year employee. So that's the max that it's going to be this year. It's a little odd that you would see those kinds of things go down, not at least be level or go up. But
Is the dispatcher community unionized?
they are.
Yes.
So that one's kind of an easy one, I guess, as far as the budget. Sorry, sir.
Longevity gave it away.
Yeah.
I just have one question. You invest and train and work with these people, and unfortunately, like you said, whether they go to somewhere else or they just burn out and decide it's not for them and they move on, do you consider offering them the part-time role as well, just to keep their skill set? Do you try to get some to come back even if they fill in on the weekends or something?
Great question, and yes, that's a resounding yes. If they're a positive, hardworking...
invested in them,
If
yeah.
we've invested in them, if they're a positive, hardworking employee and they'd like to stay on, we offer that to them, and some of them have.
To help set the count of the chase, yeah.
And as the chief referred to, the police officers that are working in there that had retained their certifications, we pay them out of our overtime budget because we don't pay them out of dispatch overtime. So that's another cost, but
And miscellaneous services, can you just, because it didn't exist before, so you've got training and clothing. What are miscellaneous services again?
So the miscellaneous services would include, when we send them for pre-employment physicals, when we have to pay separately to embroider their uniforms, and for whatever reason, that has never historically come out of their clothing line or a clothing line. We always consider that an additional service. There's, yeah, I mean, essentially those are the big ones. There's, we don't have like a travel line in there. We don't have, but a lot of them have all of a sudden realized that they can be reimbursed for travel to go to classes. And obviously they don't have an assigned cruiser, or we can't give them a car to drive. So we're starting to incur some of those costs more frequently too. So maybe next year we possibly add a travel line in there, depending, I got to look and see what it's averaging out to be over the last couple of years. But all of a sudden I've had this new influx of travel reimbursement requests. So I'm not really sure who told who what, but, and they're entitled to. I'm not saying they're not. It's just all of a sudden they just showed up. So I don't know if that, hopefully that answers the question as far as the miscellaneous services.
Yeah, it does, thank you.
Is that what one of the soon-to-be decommissioned unmarked Outback is great for?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't. We can't do that. In some of the classes, in order to go to the initial telecommunicator class, it's either a week or 2 weeks long, and they commute back and forth each day. When not going to pay for a hotel for them to go, and so it just. We had one dispatcher who lived in northern Connecticut, and it was almost a $500 travel reimbursement. So.
Yeah, I think, any other questions relative to this one? I think my one comment would be, I appreciate everything you've done trying to break stuff out. To the CFO, I still think stuff like the medical screenings of new employees should really be under like an HR line. Like that should be like an employment, and then they come over onto the respective budget. If there's new town employees, I still feel like some of those things should be parsed out on the town side before once they get the blessing that they're good to go and they've passed everything, then they should come over to the individual department. But that's just a comment. It's an accounting sort of thing. And I can appreciate the recruitment and retention. It sounds like you're doing everything to be creative without getting into, negotiations and contracts and other incentive sort of stuff. But at some point, we see it with every other department. We had an issue with inspectional services a few years back where they were losing all their inspectors, and they had to get creative and do things. And so I appreciate that you're doing that in conjunction with the fire department, because I know you kind of share this mission for the dispatchers. But they're the without them there to take the calls, I mean, the public services don't get rendered. I mean, it's
Right.
We can have all your multitude of pages of budgets, and without them, so. Yeah, we won't get into that tonight as to what other options are out there for the future, but if we're struggling and I think we're an attractive community to come work for, I don't know where we stand pay comparison to others, but.
Pay scale is halfway, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but the pay scale is actually very decent. And over the years, the former chief, this chief, the fire chief, along with town administration, have worked to get them up to a level where it's a decent rate of pay. I think that they're doing
I
all
think the
right.
better word to use is competitive.
It is. It's definitely more competitive. And we've looked at the potential for hiring bonuses, retention bonuses, not in the same vein as longevity, but just to do something to try and attract people and get them here. And like you said, hopefully once they get here, they recognize that it is a good place to work and they stay.
If we're struggling, like I said, we're an attractive community, busy, the calls are coming in, I can't imagine.
Truth be told, last year I received an unexpected call from a friend and from a former police chief, and I will not name the town, who, when I answered the phone, and he was someone that I didn't mind answering the phone because he's a friend of mine, he says, "Tell me it's not true that one of your police officers called my dispatcher while she was working and offered her a job." So
said it
I
wasn't
couldn't confirm or deny that at that point in time, but that is how competitive it is out there to get these telecommunicators professionals seated. So, I mean, they are, without pontificating, they are customer service, people pick up on their demeanor, their attitude, their helpfulness, and all of that. So to try to find the right people to sit in that seat for 8 or 16 hours a day has been a challenge. But again, that's a shared challenge that a lot of other communities have right now. But we're trying.
If no other questions, so the dispatch, the public safety dispatch section, last year's FY '24 was $871,728. This year's department request, $883,461, which is also the town manager's recommendation.
Motion to recommend.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend. All in favor? Yes, thank you. The CIP. If you want to go over anything relative to CIP in particular.
I think we would just entertain any questions that you have. Deputy Chief and myself have studied this chart over the past several weeks, and I think it's pretty transparent the way it is, but I would entertain any questions that you may have. Before if anyone has any questions about cruisers, I know there's a couple of chuckles that are out there. Last week, I received a call from my colleague and my friend, Chief Coleman, who was a little bit, I guess I can say worked up a little bit about some non-factual comments that were made on a social media platform. I can tell you that Chief Coleman and I realize that making arguments with people on social media can go one of two ways. But we talked about it, and we felt like we needed to get the information out there, and we needed to make it official. And I was able to get a hold of my deputy chief and one of my lieutenants that does a very good job on social media, and we put some information out there. And I can tell you that there were there was a lot of feedback, and I felt good about the feedback. Not only did we get feedback on social media, but I got calls and emails, and they appreciated the transparency. And it is what it is. Everybody knows here at this board what the vetting process is to make purchases, that this goes through several layers. And I had hoped that if any members of this committee had questions, that answered some of them. That wasn't the reason that it was sent out, but as Chief Coleman said, let's not let the facts get in the way of a good rumor. So.
And I'll just comment on that one, because I don't know if I started that by accident last week. I just used cruisers as an example of, as we were trying to get a better understanding of the CIP process. And I used the Auburn cruisers because of the new Tahoes, and they were very visible as people go by. And we've seen town meeting members ask questions at town meeting previously about the number of cruisers and why do we have. So I'm hoping that I was not in relation to that. I saw it and I went, oh, no.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that was the case at all. We have an idea on who probably started that issue, but this has been, and this is where I get some of the thanks from some of the citizens in town. This has been a question that's loomed my entire career. It's probably going to loom long after I do. They drive by the police station. They have a visual of what they see for cars out there, and everybody's got an opinion. Okay. One particular commenter made the statement that we had 50 Chevy Tahoes. Well, we don't have 50 Chevy Tahoes. Another one made the ludicrous, and the same person made the statement that the town of Auburn has more fire apparatus than the city of Worcester. So I think that's what got my brother a little worked up over. And we went out there, and that's what it is. And our fleet program is a success, and not a lot of other agencies. We've worked it out. It's a success. We have 2 officers assigned to a car. The car's not driven 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We're going to have mechanical issues. We're going to have upkeep on the cars. We always have one or two that are down. We are able to keep our cruisers in service. Deputy Chief's pointing this at me with the bullet points. I mean, we have 43 officers and 34 patrol cars, and that's really where it's at. And we're able to, this enables us to keep our vehicles, and we don't take them out of service until they are at end of life. You know, I have a note here that our oldest car is a 2013. Actually, we have a 2011 Ford Taurus that was driven up to last month, up and until last month, when we realized that putting any more money into the vehicle is fruitless. So I just want to assure the board that we take this very seriously, and we manage our vehicles using common sense and good judgment.
I mean, I'll just say, I think the posts were great on both sides. I think I learned a little bit, even having been on this committee for a while, and it was great. And I think the response usually aren't as positive. That was largely positive responses, and people seem to appreciate the transparency and education. And so I think you did an excellent job with it relative to that.
Thank you. It could have gone either way.
Questions, CIP questions? I'm going to ask the question because HVAC, that beloved HVAC system at the police station, that's been, what is the 450? What is that going to do? Is that going to resolve any of the poorly designed stuff with the leaves being pulled in from the?
The 450 it's deferred. There is no, the 450 is not there. It's being studied, and it was removed. So it's being studied, and there was some discussion about ARPA monies. It's not just the police station HVAC system, it's town-wide. They're doing an HVAC study to see what the most plausible reasoning.
So are they leaving it in here as a placeholder for now?
It's not in
It's in
there.
our budget here.
I'm sorry, sir?
It is. Well, I don't know what you're looking at, but the budget in our book, that's why we're bringing it up. We were given it in there.
So I have, it says FY '25, original 450, revised 0, manager recommendation 0, and they pushed it out to 2026.
But that's what I'm saying. It's
I'm
it's
sorry.
here.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Still present.
I would presume, Mr. Jones, that it's a placeholder. I want to say that that's what I thought I heard the town manager say, but I can't be 100% without
Sure.
being here. I don't know if Ms. Hanoi knows the answer to that, because I don't.
Yeah, that I'm not sure, but it is in there for the 26.
Okay.
You're right, I'm sorry.
So I think that was my interpretation. That's what I figured when you said ARPA money, and with it being under review, you want to sort of push it out, but not really let go of it because you're not sure where it's going to land.
Correct.
So I was just confirming. That's what I think. It's a placeholder.
And I was just before the board, before the committee a couple of weeks ago, asking for a transfer to do the boiler repair, which was, through the CFO's guidance, basically, we were able to save almost $5,000 on that repair. But suffice to say that our HVAC system is past end of life. We're in a 23-year-old building, I believe, and they generally expect 19 years or so, from what I've been told. But we're doing everything we can to find the most affordable options to keep it going, and to the extent that we're actually looking at, putting out quotes or requests for quotes, just even for the preventative maintenance contract. And I get very nervous when the weather gets nicer, because the system it's boiler making heat, or it's the chiller making air conditioning. And when they flick that switch and switch it over, I'm just like, just waiting, because every year it seems like almost something goes wrong. So, but optimistically, nothing's going to go wrong this year.
This time you switch it on in the morning because it's warm during the day, and at night it gets cold, and it's switch back and switch over.
It's one or the other. There's no in between. So,
Okay, any other questions for the CIP? Obviously, we'll vote on it when we get to that at the end, but
One of the things I just wanted to point out to a couple of the larger departments, and since the fire department's already here, they'll hear this. But for people that are coming on the board, if you'll look at your backup, you'll see that we have your 29, because when we've submitted others, and we've talked about it as a board, that when we vote on this, we sort of voted into, and we're just getting the latest. But for people that are just coming on, I would suggest that you just be prepared for questions of the past, because some of us need to be brought up to speed on some of the stuff that's already being purchased, or it could lead to those kinds of questions, which is the only one I have. On the drone, I noticed that, I wasn't here when they came into play, and I noticed that they're on 25 and they go only out another year. Is it just 1 or 2 drones that you're looking to take on and operate, and then as the lifespan of that goes, that you'll replace them later on in future years?
So the deputy chief and I, we talked about it, because as the chief, I touch a lot of little things, but I don't know everything about everything. And we've had a very successful drone program so far. It's been in place since 2018.
That's where I was heading. And so this initiated in 2018.
It's initiated in 2018. Most notable, I'm sure everyone remembers this past year, the standoff in Worcester, and our assets were requested when there were shots fired at police officers in the city of Worcester. I believe it was a 13-hour standoff. And not only did we deploy regional assets with Semlec, with the Bearcat, which is the big ballistic vehicle that we had, but our drone team responded, Officer Laskus and another one of our patrolmen that escapes me at this time. And they utilized that drone to actually make access inside the home. So drones have various purposes. Some of them are tactical, where they can actually enter homes and go inside and do a room check to preserve a human being from going in there. And they deployed the robot. The robot actually got shot, and the city of Worcester, under the new chief, Paul Saucier, they stepped up because they realized it was an asset that we sent from our community, and they actually repaired they covered the cost of the repair of the robot to the tune of several $1,000s. We've utilized the drones at public events, 4th of July events, missing persons, missing elderly people, searches for suspects, and car crashes. That's another important one they do. They utilize them for mapping and for documenting serious car crashes, fatalities, serious injuries. So the drones they're here to stay. They're unfortunately right now, this is just for your edification, and I know this from attending Mass Chiefs events, that right now there's limitations on grant funding for drones, because the federal government is concerned about a lot of the parts and pieces being manufactured in China. So there's been limitations on federal grant funding that we hope are in place. And the deputy chief did his due diligence with our drone people to determine what the life expectancy is of drones. And we're around, 5 to 8 years?
Yeah, 5 to 8.
On the
Which is
drone.
why they fall off the budget after this next year, because they're expected to last well into fiscal year 30 or 31.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. We had, without getting into any particulars, but we had an incident on a body of water here a few years ago, and that drone has never been recovered. It's down at the bottom of that body of water. Fortunately, we were able to replace it, and every year they come out with better technology. The drones now have technology so they won't go into the water, so, which is always a good thing. So they have that technology, but the use and the public safety benefits for the drones are huge.
So originally, excuse me, in 2018, we bought the original drone for $6,800. Since 2018, we've only invested $300 in the drone unit, and that was to replace, excuse me, replace batteries, because that's one of the limiting factors, I guess, for them. So even though earlier I told you that you'd be pleased to know that some of the technology or some of the costs have gone down, They have, but the drones now, originally what we mapped out for money, I have I have 3 quotes right now, and they range from $23,000 to $26,000 for a drone replacement. But again, that's expected to last at least 5 years, and hopefully we get backup batteries with that as well. And a lot of it's just the upgraded cameras, and some of that technology it's really gone crazy. And quite honestly, the amount that it was increased, it was based on an experience that the town manager had at the fireworks, and he had seen a drone that the sheriff's department had used, and he made several inquiries as to what it was and how much it cost. And so I think that's where the change in the amount came from.
That particular incident, and just for your edification, because I found it very interesting as well, was during the 4th of July events, we had some individuals that the police had prior contact with, and on other dates and times, that made their way to the deployment area where the company that was hired to set off the fireworks were. They were concerned about their proximity because it was unsafe for them. The sheriff's department were able to deploy their drone, find them, and bring the officers right to them. So that was another success story at a townwide event.
And through the chair, I just want clarification on the replacement of the radio console or the dispatch radio console, because dispatch is sort of separated out. It says 5-year lifespan, or LP, but yet when that was in '24, but if you come out, it's about midway down, it says replace dispatch radio console, and it's at $50,000. But 5 years from them would be '29, but I notice it's not out there.
I
So is
believe
that
that was a
anticipated?
5-year lease program, and
5-year lease
I
program.
believe the last year of the lease just occurred, if I'm not mistaken.
So we're renewing it currently in fiscal year '25?
I'm sorry, this is the last year of the lease program.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Chief.
It's similar to like Taser, if you look at the Taser line.
No, but I guess my question is
sorry.
there a cost to renew it? I'm just curious why it's pushed off with fiscal year '24. Are these costs now to the accountant? Are these what we're spending this year?
Yes, in FY '24.
Okay, so that's why. So then, I would think we'd anticipate something down the road in another 5 years, another lease plan. I'm just asking because it's not out there. And so I'm just wondering why we're not putting another $116,000
It's a
out.
lease, it's a government capital lease, same deal. 30, yeah.
It should appear,
So it's 10 years lifespan for the equipment, so year 1 will start in FY '30, so you'll see that next year for year 1.
got it, thank you. Okay. I'll be looking for it.
Any other questions for the police chief and deputy chief?
No, I'm good.
Through the chair, I'd like to personally thank the board for your support, your past support, and your continued support. Chief Coleman, our departments, police and fire, communications, we're very blessed to have the support. This is why I came to this town 30 years ago. It's very professionally run, and I think it's a lot to be able to say that your public safety people that are out there every day feel very supported by the boards and the Auburn community. So I just wanted to give you a heartfelt thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So we'll move on to fire rescue, it's number 220 in our. Chief Coleman, Deputy Chief Johnson, how are we?
Good evening.
Did you want to kind of do it the same format? Do you want to start with just an overview, highlights, things that
Yes, yep.
us versus
That would,
town manager's
that would be great.
recommendations?
Yep.
Makes it easier for us and
Absolutely. All right.
So I want to just start off by giving you a little bit of a staffing update because that's going to play into when we get down into the salary line. So as you are aware, at the fall town meeting last year, town meeting appropriated funding to hire 4 additional firefighter paramedics. To date, those positions have not been filled. We did go through the hiring process. We made conditional offers. We've been doing backgrounds. We were slated to have those positions start on April 8th, but with our current overtime deficit, I made the decision to push those positions off until July 8th of next fiscal year, so we could utilize that money that we had available from April 8th to June 30th to be able to put towards the overtime shortfall that we have. So we will have a total of 6 positions coming on in July 8th, the 4 new, and then filling 2 vacancies that we have. So, you know, for us, it's a little more difficult to bring on a single employee, where with the police department, like if they hire somebody and they go into field training, they're working with another officer. It's actually easier for us to bring in people in larger groups when we do their orientations. And the reality is that those positions that were coming on April 8th, they weren't going to do anything to sort of solve the overtime situation between April and June 30th. So that money is going to be best utilized going towards the shortfall and then just bringing everybody on together on July 8th. So I just wanted to
Because
kind
they're
of,
not on their own, correct? Is that?
because they're not on their own. Correct. Correct. Yeah, typically, our new employees are not actually eligible for overtime for close to a year.
Yeah, close to a year, depending on what they've had for training already coming in. But if they've already academy trained, it's still 3 months.
So on July 8th, that will bring all of the groups from 10 to 11 members. So the first thing that I want to highlight with this budget is on the bottom of the budget sheet, you will see that the proposed budget is $5,143,268, and that shows an 8.5% increase. But I just want to stress that that is not the actual increase from fiscal 24 to 25, because what's not reflected in here is those 4 positions that were brought on at town meeting that are currently in the fiscal 24 budget. So that's not reflective, though, of the change from 24 to 25. So that inflates the percentage.
Is this is what was appropriated at the time we voted?
Correct.
I understand.
That's correct. So, I just lost my place here. So that's not the actual increase. And then with what is being covered from ambulance receipts, the actual increase from 24 to 25 from the tax levy is 1.87%. So that's the actual increase to the levy. So the way that the fire department budget is built, and I know we have some new members, is when you look at the total operating budget of, we'll call it 5.1 million, on an annual basis, approximately $1.5 million from the ambulance appropriations account is used as a direct offset to our budget. So the actual, and out of that 1.5 million, that funds 12 firefighter paramedic positions, including all fringe benefits. It pays for the medical director position from UMass Medical Center. It pays for the medical supply line item within this budget. And it also funds the fleet mechanic position and the training officer position within the department. So that means the actual amount of levy funding used to support the fire rescue budget for fiscal 25 would be $3,643,000, $643,268. So there is, like I said, on an annual basis, a direct offset of 1.5 million from the ambulance appropriations account. So our ambulance collections in fiscal 23 was $2,220,976. That's pretty standard. We're over the 2 million mark on an annual basis. And the current ambulance appropriations account, as it sits today, has a balance of $4,365,003. And we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get into capital, but all of the ambulance capital is purchased through that ambulance appropriations account and not the actual levy, but we can talk about that in a little bit. So just going down the budget lines, Fire Administration 201, this request meets all contractual and bylaw obligations that are being met. 202, you'll see that the license and certification line has been significantly reduced. And if you recall, over the last several years, I've been realigning money from various line items to better reflect how the money is actually being used. We would, as an example, we would have some money in license and certification, but we were paying dues out of that. Well, we have a dues and meetings account. So over the last several years, and we're pretty close, I'd say we're 98% there. This was the last year that we kind of did a realigning of making sure that each of the accounts, we were better able to account for what was being spent from there. So you'll see a reduction of that $20,000 from the license and certification line, but that money was placed both into the technology support line and the dues and meetings line, again, just to better reflect the use. So about $9,000 went to dues and meetings. That primarily covers our hospital radio infrastructure dues through Central Mass EMS. About $11,400 went from the technology support line, went into the technology support line for service contracts for some of our technology equipment. But there was an increase to the technology line in this fiscal year by roughly about $17,500 for 3 new software programs that were introduced in fiscal '24 that were not budgeted, that are now being accounted for in fiscal '25. One of those, including our portable radio service contract through Motorola. So let's see. So the remaining part of that increase is basically adjustments in, much like police, various contracts and services, new technology. We have iPads in all of our vehicles. That's how we receive our dispatching. So if an iPad were to break, the technology support line is where that equipment would come from. So I requested an additional $15,000 in the building maintenance line. And, there's a couple of things that I just want to point out tonight, because I think sometimes there's a little confusion on what the line actually represents or what the line is being used for. So let's take building maintenance as an example. So I requested 35 this year in FY24. I have $35,000. I requested 50, and the town manager recommended 37. And again, I understand in this climate, I understand why, he recommended the 37. But whether it's a request of 50 or what I will wind up with at 37, that does not represent $37,000 worth of broken stuff or things that are being repaired. It's important to take into consideration that on this $37,000 budget, on July 1, 17,000 of that 37 will be automatically encumbered on July 1 for our various service contracts, maintenance agreements, what we anticipate our supply use will be, from toilet paper to cleaning supplies to everything else in the station. We ballpark that at about 17,000. So on July 1, from that $37,000 budget, that gives me a remaining balance of about $20,000, right, with 2 buildings, so $10,000 per building for the remainder of the fiscal year for anything that comes up maintenance related. Now, we've recently had a couple of HVAC issues. Station 2's actually suffered quite a bit of of heartache this winter. You know, we had a new water heater, we had to replace the washing machine, we had to replace the refrigerator, we had some HVAC issues. An HVAC company is not walking in the door of any building right now for less than $1,000. Between the shop labor rate, what you're getting for parts, I've been doing, you know, a review over the last couple of days of some of our HVAC stuff, just, you know, 3 invoices that I pulled randomly because I was looking at something. They ranged from $800 to $1,100. Like, that's the price to have, you know, a professional tradesman come through the door. So whether you have a plumbing issue, an electrical issue, an HVAC issue, you know, that's sort of the price. But really what I'm working with for the entire year is roughly $10,000 per building. You know, at the end of the day, it's not a lot of money. When you look at the budget and you look at fiscal '23 in the building maintenance line, you'll see that the actual spending was a little over $48,000. Now, I did a little bit of a deep dive into fiscal '23 to see what we had for kind of like, was there anything huge? Was there anything outstanding? And, you know, the answer is no. It's pretty much, it's routine maintenance. We didn't have like, there wasn't like a $10,000 expense that I could point my finger at. But I think what's going on, and it's already been talked about tonight, is I think fiscal '23 is a better representation on what things cost today in the economy. Because if you go back to fiscal '21, it was 30,000, went to 31,000, and then we had this huge jump to 48,000 with no significant notable repair to note. So I feel that the 3-year average is a little bit skewed because of that, so I think FY23 is a better reflection of what actual spending is on the building, which is what prompted my $50,000 request. But again, I understand that, you know, this isn't going to do it. But I can't promise that I'm not going to be back in '25 trying to move some money around in the event that I have, you know, something go wrong. Let's see. There's a slight increase in the professional development line for bringing on some new members. So we'll move to the fire suppression line, 211, or the fire suppression section.
While you
Yes.
because that is a fairly.
Okay, so this is another example of moving money around. So you'll see the dues and meetings line went from 23,000 to 2,600. The majority of that money went into professional development. So all the money, for the most part, like I said, with a 1.8% increase, it's all the same money. I just reallocated it to different lines to have it make more sense operationally.
What kind of things are under professional development? What do you cover?
So professional development is anything from conferences, but it also covers all of the recertification for EMTs and paramedics. So that's the bulk of that line. There's probably only about 5,000 that's, you know, for like professional development opportunities outside of recertification. The bulk of that is recertification, pay and training for their recon hours. So under the firefighter salary and education line, that meets all contractual obligations for FY25. Overtime, this is something that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. Again, much like...
Are you decreasing it?
No. So here's the thing that I want to make sure that I impress upon the Finance Committee, because I think that with overtime, there's this misconception that overtime is a bad thing, or, you know, that overtime sometimes gets out of control. And, you know, I sit before you here tonight to say that that is not true. That is 100% not an accurate statement. We track our overtime in 46 different categories within the department. I can tell you where every penny of overtime goes and what its use is for. Okay. Again, giving credit where credit is due, the deputy does a great job within the payroll tracking all of these overtime expenses. And I think, you know, it's been mentioned before that I think when you're talking about overtime, people immediately sometimes say, well, you know, we must have a sick time problem. If we're spending that much overtime, we have a sick time problem. Every January, I request from Ms. Harnois's office a copy of the sick time usage for our department, and I evaluate every sick hour on an annual basis that is reviewed. And I produce a report, and I can tell you that the average sick time use for the employees within my department is the average use of 2 days per employee on an annual basis. We do not have a sick time problem within the fire rescue department. When you look at where the overtime goes to, much like the police department, they mentioned the top 3 highlighted areas. The number 1 reason for overtime at 27% is vacancies. The number 2 reason at 10% is injured on duty. And the number 3 reason at 7% is off-duty injuries, covering people that were injured off-duty. So, and most of these other categories, they range from anything, you know, court time to training, you know, staff meetings, conducting interviews, precepting employees. Like I said, 46 categories our overtime is tracked on a weekly basis.
Chief, can we pass it down?
Sure. Yep. So the next thing that I want to pass around, if you could pass this around as well, Mr. Chairman. Pass one of those to everybody. On an annual basis, the amount of overtime hours that we, you know, distribute are pretty equal. About 4,000 hours of overtime go to, on average, the top 3 categories that I just mentioned that are being passed around, right? And then that leaves about 6,000 hours for the other categories. One of the major struggles that I have internally within my budget relative to overtime is it's not that the overtime hours are increasing at this dramatic rate, which is why my overtime request is larger, okay? The sheet that I just passed around starts in fiscal 18. It shows you that my overtime budget in fiscal 18 was $188,000 and some change, 188.8. And then we used to separate the holiday overtime. So I had a separate holiday overtime line, which you'll see that's no longer funded in here. So that meant as a total, I had $228,000. But what would happen is if I had extra money in holiday because certain employees didn't work holidays, I'd have to come before the finance committee and transfer money from the whole holiday overtime line to the regular overtime line. So, but it was 228. In fiscal 19, the overtime went to 225. My holiday line stayed at 40, so I had 265. You'll see that I worked 2 fiscal years, 19 and 20, with level funded overtime. Okay. Then in fiscal 21, overtime went to 260. Holiday overtime remained at 40. So the total overtime amount was 300. I worked for 2 years at a level funded overtime of 300. And then in fiscal 23, the overtime was reduced from 300 to 273. What we did was in fiscal 23, we decided, you know what, we're going to put the overtime, the holiday overtime and the regular overtime together. So I have one overtime pot and I don't have to keep coming to finance to transfer holiday overtime. But we reduced it by $27,000 because in fiscal 23, when we looked at what the 3-year average was for overtime, we felt, you know, let's just say that the 273 reflected what the 3-year average was, okay? But again, the 3-year average, I think, was not necessarily accurate. And then in fiscal 24, I was brought back to 300, but the 300 that I was brought to in this current fiscal year is the same overtime amount I was working with in fiscal 21. So despite 8% increases in COLA over that time period, additional percentages for employees that had step increases, additional staff, we're working within the same number of hours on an annual basis, right? We're not inventing new hours. The problem is that the overtime line item it's underfunded. It's been level funded since fiscal '21. So I'm getting a lot less bang for my buck in terms of overtime today than I was in fiscal '21, okay? So you heard the police chief up here say that his overtime budget is a little under $300,000, and he maintains a shift of 4. He has a sergeant and 3 patrol. Our minimum is 8. I'm maintaining double the staff with essentially the same overtime budget. The math doesn't work. So,
Chief, I just want to interrupt you for a second. I think it's important what he brought up is, overtime does get as a sort of a bad word and it jumps out at people, but it's really, it's a good management business strategy for a short amount of more money. You can have 100 firefighters and we're paying all the costs of health insurance and benefits and you would never have an overtime shift to fill because there was, a plentiful number of employees, but that doesn't make good management sense for the town long-term to have all these people on straight time that aren't utilized efficiently. So that overtime, not only is it's an efficient use of a little more money than a straight salary, but it's not a lot more money. And that also has the benefits of, when you're trying to attract people, there's a little bit of money to be made. Occasionally, there's a little bit of shift work, extra work. So you're able to retain people. And we talked about the recruitment and the training, to lose people, to go there's some opportunities. So it really does sort of, big picture wise, it has to be balanced. It can't be, you're so short that you're, every shift, every day is backfilling with overtime. But I think if you find that right balance, and I think you're there, we're trying to get up to there with that balance. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it does get a bad name, I think, when the overtime, the lines do. When we look at things.
I think it's just important for the committee to understand sort of the behind the scenes of overtime it's necessary. You can't operate any department in this community without overtime. That's the reality. And I think by showing that, we're tracking it, we're aware of our overtime hours, overtime's not, it's out of control. I'll lightly use the word out of control this year because you all know the situation that we're in, right? We had this perfect storm of, since July 1, I've had at any given time, I've had up to at its height 9 vacant positions. I can't, what do you do with that? So, but I'm already behind the 8 ball, and that's part of the reason why that whole, when I came to the committee before the first of the year to bring to your attention this overtime situation. In some respects, you got to look at it this way. Yes, it's a big number, right? But what you have to keep in mind is that part of the reason why the number is so big on top of the amount of vacancies is because the line item is underfunded to begin with. And I guess that's kind of the perfect way to say it is, I'm trying to maintain a minimum staff double what the police department is trying to maintain on a daily basis with virtually the same amount of overtime. It doesn't work. So same rules apply with our overtime line that it does to the building maintenance line. If you look at the overtime line for fiscal '23 at $410,000, again, fiscal '23, we had a vacancy or 2, and there was maybe a little gap, as we were bringing people on and things like that. But certainly nowhere near the crisis that I've been in this fiscal year. So I think the 410, and even if you kicked it down to 400, right? I think the 400 number is really what a realistic overtime number is. So I think FY23, much like in building, is a better reflection of what the 3-year average is. Because when you go back to FY21, and this is the amazing part, right? And I still don't understand how this maths, to be quite honest with you, is when you look at what the overtime was, I I know sort of what the reason is, and it has to do with insurance. But when you look at what the overtime spending is in FY21 at 210, that's less money than what I'm budgeted. So when you're factoring in and looking at the 3-year average, and one of the numbers doesn't even meet the number that you were budgeted in that fiscal year, it drives the 3-year average down, which again is what that decision to put the overtime back at 275, that's where we kind of went wrong, right? We shouldn't have reduced it by 27,000. But again, hindsight's 2020. One of the reasons that 3-year average got driven down so much is because of 21. And I think that was because insurance payments that we received were applied towards overtime, and that number got driven down further.
Through the chair, Chief, how would you say that during the pandemic period, say second half of 2020, 21, 22, did that cause your overtime to go up or go down? Because that can kind of throw off your 3-year average, whether positive or negatively.
Yeah, so that was an interesting time, for sure. I'd say the general answer is no, and that was strategic because what we did was, currently we have 4 working groups. During COVID, we created a 5th group. We took members, we brought the groups from 10, or I don't know if we were 9 at that time. I think we were at 9 at that time. We took 2 members from every group and we created a 5th group and brought all the groups for 7. And I closed fire prevention and I took the fire prevention captain out. So he led group 5, right? And we essentially had no overtime because if people got sick, we brought people in from a new rotation that just went into that rotation. So for actually that period of time where we were in lockdown from March to, we'll say, June, we kept all 5 groups for the most part completely separate from each other, and we really didn't incur any overtime by design because we did not want to cross-contaminate the department.
So you could say then that the 3-year average is probably deflated and you need more, because if you include 21, 22, late 2020, you probably would have spent more if there wasn't a pandemic.
Correct. Yeah, I would say, and that's a great point, Ms. Coleman. To your point, in 20, which would have been part of fiscal 21, we spent less money in overtime for a short period of time, maybe a 3 or a 4 month period of time. But I think the large thing that's driving sort of the overtime deficit is the mere fact that, over that 4-year period of time, between step increases and cost of living increases, we have employees that have seen over a 10% pay increase, and that's not reflected in the overtime number. So again, right, the amount of hours is not like, you can't turn around and say, oh my God, how did you do 10,000 extra hours of overtime? We don't. That's the range is pretty much the same. We're just getting less value for the money that we have. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because I think it's an important part. So, my overtime request was $420,000, again, because I think FY23 is a better reflection of what the true overtime cost is. But again, understanding that it's not possible this year, the manager did recommend a $35,000 increase in overtime, which essentially matches the 3-year average. But again, I think it's somewhat problematic because I think the 21 is driving the 3-year average number lower. But I understand the request.
And we don't get out of the vacancy hole for still a significant period of time.
It'll be, and especially, so we conducted interviews today, much like the dispatch candidates. The candidate pool is, we always seem to like pull out this miracle and we hire good people. I'd rather not hire anybody than to hire some, but we always seem to at the 11th hour, like we pull it out. But the people that we're pulling out today, they are as green as a stick. They do not have experience. They have really no major experience in the back of an ambulance or they've ever ridden a fire truck. So I would say with the majority of the people, with the exception of maybe one of the 6 people that we'll be bringing on in July, these people are going to need that 1 year of, their full 1 year probation. They will not be allowed to work overtime. They won't be able to fill extra shifts. They'll be working on getting cleared both as on the ambulance side from their preceptors, plus driver training and all of those stuff. So
Do they fill a seat for that vacancy? Do they fill a seat on a truck? If that's,
They won't count for a little while. They won't count for, if you're,
it won't
if
take
you're,
the full year, but they,
won't take the full year, but if you're green, you're going to be a good 6 to 8 months where we have to really evaluate you before you completely count towards a shift.
I have a few
Please.
questions. This is what you budgeted, correct? And this is actual data. And my second question is, as a board, so, when we approve or recommend, so the chief is asking for one number, the town manager is asking for another number. When we recommend, which one are we recommending?
typically recommending typically it's the town manager's recommendation we follow. But certainly we have the ability to discuss going outside those recommendations and making our own recommendation. Just being aware, I think, that any of those recommendations, whether they be on a plus or minus, impact the overall number, especially if we're pushing the envelope of reaching that 2.5 max. In other years, I think we've had some room where we could say, the CFO would be able to come to us and say, hey, we've got this window and we think this is coming in here. We'd have a little more room, but I think we're at the ceiling right now. So I think any recommendations higher than what the town manager is recommending would have to have a deeper discussion as to what that would impact. So if we were to give the fire chief an additional $100,000 towards that overtime account, we'd have to discuss that might have to come off of somebody else's and other departments, or risk going. Karen, do you want to sort of touch on that? I mean,
Yeah, that's correct, because we were only within hundreds of dollars of being within a balanced budget. So yeah, there would have to be deeper discussions at that point of where we would balance the increase for.
and I suppose, if we felt that we wanted to make a change such as that, we certainly could not make our recommendations tonight and discuss it, push it towards the tail end to see if anything's changed. We could have that further discussion as a committee.
I actually have an observation that might lead to that, how we respond to that. If you could just bear with me for 2 minutes on an example. If you're a manager and you have a couple people reporting to you and somebody goes out sick and all of a sudden it's a busy time and you're having to have somebody work 20 or 30 hours to just do overtime because you've got so much work that person's got to get piled on and you're trying to compensate for that. At some point, you have what you call a legitimate time that they have to work. At some point in some jobs, you can't just work that many hours. You have to do something to, whether it means creating a new department, creating a new position, whether it be part-time or full-time. If you're excessively, constantly having to reach for overtime, one of the concepts is, gee, maybe it's time that we create a new person. I'm actually going to take that in a different analysis. What I'd like to suggest is that if you've got 10,000 hours and looking at your sheet, 60 to 70% of that are in 3 categories. If we're going to take the time to add 2 or 3 line items to the police budget for not even 1% of what their overall budget is, I would think that with fire, given the complexity of what overtime is, because you can't fault the public and the taxpayers for sitting in town meeting or looking at a budget or watching our meetings and hearing a discussion about overtime. But it would make more sense to me to be prudent and say, if 60 to 70% of a line item is absorbed in 1 or 2 areas, maybe we should be identifying that and not calling it overtime. Whether it's a shift differential, whether it is a injured off duty. Because I think, for me, what it's saying is that some of this back and forth comes because there's a whole majority of the workforce that does, and I have to be very careful how I word this, but I'm serious. There's a whole majority of the workforce that's out there in the world that extends themselves, that don't get all of these various types of compensations for all of the manners in which the waves ebb and flow, trying to be very general. And to that point, we all step up and we all work really hard. So I think we're using the wrong terminology. And let's be fair, I believe, looking at tonight's transfer, I think, and unfortunately with the circumstances that you've been faced with this year, we're well into 6 digits of overtime this year, and it's no secret for people that are watching the meeting that it's been an extraordinary year for you, and my hat goes off to just managing it just based on your presentation. But my concern as a finance committee member is also to sit here and represent the people that all of the money is coming out of their pocket, and they're relying on us to be able to understand, interpret, and work with all of that. So we put so much time sometimes into this area of the budget, and it becomes such a complex reiteration. We're constantly reminding people that overtime is a very complex formula in some of these large divisions, police, fire, DPW, various areas. And we happen to be talking about yours, but I'm being more general. And so my concern is that if we've got, why not just put it out there? People have to understand that you have challenges as major departments and stop calling it overtime.
But it is overtime.
Well,
is it not?
it's
In terms of-
maybe the form of pay is calculated as overtime, but the category isn't overtime. It's a form of overtime.
Well, technically, if you've got, 10 employees at $100 a year,
Yeah.
then, it's $1,000 is the labor of the town pays $100 for all the labor.
Yep.
And then if you're paying X number of people 120, then that 20 is going to be overtime.
Right, but we
So
also.
that's more of a management point.
Well, I'm speaking to the management of
Right.
this town. I'm speaking on behalf of a finance committee member to the selectmen, to the managers in the town, and to the town manager and assistant manager, in stating that I think what's happening here is we have a stipend line, we have a clothing allowance line, we have these various lines with de minimis amounts to break them out. We're talking about 10,000 hours of work that is well-earned, well-compensated, and well-deserved. But maybe the trigger is that we don't identify it just as overtime, but we identify it for what it really is. Even if we take the 80-20 rule, which is a word we use in finance, 80% of the problem is usually 20% of the time to fix. Well, I think a lot of the pressure would go away if the reality in the budget was that, well, we have injured on duty and we have 6,000 hours this year. I'm coming in for a transfer for injured on duty. I'm coming in for a transfer for overtime because I've got 9 vacancies and I've got to keep them going. Because I think that's a much clearer discussion and the public's entitled to that knowledge. And we sit here and we attack it because it's overtime. And we make it appear as though you've got, I believe, 8 employees on 3 different shifts. You said your count was 8 for one? 4.
4 shifts.
4 shifts, but you have 8 on each shift.
And they work 24
And they work 24 hours. So my point is that on each one of those shifts, at some point, you're down people, and people from other shifts have to step in. And so therefore, that needs to be not just in our budget, but it needs to be recognized in the budget and not as an overtime number.
I think sort of what you're going to is, I've asked in past years, and thank you for that sheet this year. That was the most clarifying.
But I mean, you have 60%, that's 6,000 hours on 3 lines. It's not a $2,000 clothing allowance.
And I've just interrupted just for a moment. I've asked in the past if the town's payroll system broke down, what was the cause of the overtime? Was it backfill for vacation? Was it backfill for an injured on duty? Was it backfill for training? Just like you've done on your spreadsheet. I don't know if the system has those capabilities, but those type of things, even to break down.
That's a
even
whole
just to
nother topic, which infuriates me, is
No,
that
but-
computers can't do it, but our staff can do it.
I can tell you that the computer cannot do this, and I can tell you that 100% of the data entry that goes into here is between the deputy and the administrative assistant on a weekly basis as they're doing payrolls, manages
It's
this sheet.
extracted.
It's extracted from the payroll, but it's important to do, you know?
And that's something for the CFO through HR for townwide systems at some point to look at, additional drop downs as to what accounts you're drawing from for those various leaves, or backfill or overtime accounts. My agency does it very, very granular, right down to special events and things of that nature, so they can run a report. This is where all our hours went to. But yeah, I mean, Patrick, to your point, I mean, that overtime line could be, if we got more granular with backfill vacancy, backfill injuries, and then other or miscellaneous, it may look better for the taxpayers to see.
Well, I just think when we're going before a town meeting and we're going before our selectmen and the other people, because we are a body that serves all of them, that we have to look out for the best interest of everybody. And I don't think sitting here and talking about 10,000 hours when we're breaking out a $2,000 clothing line is giving it the merit and the attention it needs. Thank you.
This might be a good segue into something that I don't know that I've fully got a grasp on. You're one of the few town departments that has a revenue source through ambulance receipts. Can you explain how the determination is made for which lines get paid for ambulance receipts, what the cap is? You mentioned $1.5 million of this budget
It's
being
1.5
paid out of,
million.
huh?
1.5 million.
1.5 million, yes. Is paid out of ambulance receipts. How do we make that determination? Why do we not go a little higher in a year like this to say, this is a tough year? Why don't we dip further? You mentioned the account currently has 4 million, and I know some you'll discuss when we get to the CIP. Just based on the things that you just mentioned for taxpayers, some of those things are, well, I've paid my insurance premiums and needed, and now the town was recouped because of my ambulance trip. So that goes into the account. Or for those that maybe are publicly funded reimbursements, as a taxpayer, I paid state money, which is paid for these services in essence. So could you just explain how we decide how much of that account we utilize? Will this be a year that maybe we should look to take a little more out based on some of the stuff we've discussed?
So it's a good point, and this is that year. This is the highest we've ever taxed ambulance receipts, is the 1.5 million. The last few years, it's been somewhere around 1.2. We squeezed every ounce of juice this year, and it was the 1.5 after many, many conversations with the town manager. The 1.5 is a number that we felt comfortable with, because here's the other thing that you got to take into consideration is, although that I reported that there's $4 million in the account, that includes the 1.5 that we'll be taking, plus just on order right now, we have about $1.3 million, $1.4 million in ambulances on order that get paid for directly out. So that 4 million is not really 4 million. The majority of that 4 million is accounted for in terms of not only future operating budgets to apply, but the capital that goes along with that. So essentially, the things that the ambulance appropriations account covers is anything that is EMS related. That's sort of the, and again, right, people can get liberal with it in terms of saying, well, I protect this ambulance account like it's my own because I don't want it pillaged, because it's so important of what it covers. You're right. We are the only department that's applying this year 1.5 million to our own operating budget. But we're able to do that because we're cautious about how that money is utilized. So if you look at your budget on the bottom, there's a single star that says funded through ambulance receipts. So any line that you look that has a star on it, or the 2 stars, those are covered through ambulance receipts. So essentially, like I said, 12 full-time firefighter paramedic positions. It's normally been 10. This is the first year that we've gone to 12, including all of the fringe benefits. And when I say all of fringe, I mean right down to the retirement piece, the OPEB piece, like, you know, I think it's 30% is what they use. It covers the fleet mechanic position. And again, the reason that we kind of make that stretch is the fleet mechanic is in charge of fixing the ambulances. So that's an acceptable account. Pays for the EMS coordinator position. It pays for the medical director, the associate medical director. It's not funded, but that is a position that's in there. And if it was filled, it would come from ambulance receipts. And then the $65,000 in medical supplies, equipment for the ambulances, all of that, that's paid for out of there. So that 1.5 million, that has been stretched this year. To go beyond the 1.5, we run the risk of not being able to cover our future capital requests that are currently within the 5-year plan, and run the risk that we're not going to be able to do a 1.2 to 1.5 million in future fiscal years.
Mr. Chair, if I could point out, in the budget of the available funds for fiscal year '25, in ambulance revenue, it's $1,985,000. And the year before was $1,667,000, so it has crept up higher. And as the chief has said, we don't want to get too close to our actual collections.
And we also have other equipment that comes out of there, the monitors, the EKG monitors, you have stair chairs, you have stretchers. All of those are very expensive, but yet don't necessarily meet a capital need as far as going on a capital schedule. And we do have to replace them from time to time, which you'll see us come to town meeting usually in the fall. And we make an appropriation out of that account to cover those costs. On top of that, the revenues, there's always talk about ambulance revenues going up and down between what the insurance is going to cover, what Medicare, Medicaid, what they're going to cover. We do some additional reporting to try to maximize the amount of ambulance receipts that we do collect. Just takes a lot of work, but we analyze it all down, submit it in to the appropriate agencies to get further reimbursement.
Where are we, while you're mentioning collections, what, usually you give us every year sort of a percentage of how we're doing, and we usually do pretty well.
Yeah, our collections are pretty consistent. Our collections have climbed on an annual basis as premiums are adjusted, but we're always around 90% collections.
Just a question as to, you mentioned the things that start off on here that go, you mentioned professional development is EMT and paramedic certification and stuff. It seems like that would be an obvious one for ambulance receipts. I just noticed that was.
That is in there. It's just not starred.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So the formula that they use for the benefits includes a portion of overtime, all their certifications. It's a whole mix of things that the town manager likes to use.
That's actually a great point towards overtime. Again, I don't want to start that we're the only department, but a portion of the overtime is covered through ambulance receipts as well, and not from the levy. So, I get it looks like a big number, but there are other revenue sources that go into making that.
No, but you've got some departments that are operating very strict, and then you come in and you sit down and you say, we have to do a special transfer for $45,000 to overtime. 2 weeks later, we're having another meeting, you come in and you say, we have to move another transfer. So within a month or two, you're already twice of half the budgets, and it's just overtime. So again, to my point, it's just adding a level of knowledge and clarity to our budget that I think it needs to be considered.
Do most of the receipts come through insurance payments?
Yes. Medicare and Medicaid cap their rates. So, the reality is that, and insurance companies are constantly fighting to pay even less than they're paying now. They don't want to pay anything. So Medicare and Medicaid are capped at, I think, $400. So regardless of what we do, the cost for the trip, although some may say that it's high, and I'm not going to say that it's not, but you also have to factor in what it takes to run that service. You're talking about people, vehicles, equipment, right? you know, a $1,500 or a $2,000 ambulance bill, I'm not going to say that's not a lot of money, but that $2,000 isn't covering the cost to run the service. So it makes it even more difficult when you're capped at $400 from Medicaid. We have a high Medicaid and Medicare population, not as high as some other communities. I mean, some other communities, 50, 60% of their payers are Medicaid. And even though they may do more calls, they're making way less money. But yes, I would say probably 80%, 75 to 80% of the collections are from insurance companies. And then Medicare, Medicaid, and then self-pay. We rarely have a lot of self-pay. If somebody's a self-pay, it's ultimately a bill that's getting written off. Nobody's paying their ambulance bill if it's a self-pay.
How do motor vehicles accidents work? Do those come through the auto insurance?
Car insurance first, then medical insurance.
And those have a different rate? Or,
No, what he's saying is if we send a bill for $2,000, the car insurance will pay whatever they're going to pay. Then it goes to their medical insurance, and then they pay whatever they're going to pay. And then there's usually a balance, at the end.
Chief, could you just explain for new members how we're not in the billing business? We have a
Correct, yeah.
service, correct?
So we contract with a third-party billing service called Comstar. They're contracted with hundreds of departments across the Commonwealth. Very good to work with, very responsive. So anytime we get a call at the fire station, and we get some, but not a lot. The bill comes from Comstar. It says Auburn Fire Rescue Department on it, but it comes from Comstar. So it says if you have questions with your ambulance bill, call Comstar. Sometimes we will have people call us. We'll listen. We'll hear what's going on. But all of the customer service aspect goes to Comstar. Ambulance billing, much like really any medical billing, it's an extremely complex thing. So we outsource that, and they're paid. The billing company is paid. They take a percentage of the collections, so that's how they're compensated.
And collecting ambulance receipts, there's quite a lag time on the money flowing in by the time insurance companies pay and everything. You're looking at, a few months behind always.
Chief, did you have other things?
There's just two other lines that I just want to bring to your attention, and then we're done. It's under 212 equipment repair. That's increased a little bit, but again, right, same point here as with building. We're not talking about $30,000 worth of broken stuff on July 1. Close to $10,000 is encumbered right out of the gate for equipment testing, which leaves us a balance of about $20,000 to deal with, whatever other equipment issues come up over the course of the year. Small increase in the equipment line just due to, rising cost. And then you'll see an increase in the health and wellness line. And that's to prepare for some new OSHA standards and some other physical fitness initiatives that I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's the budget as presented. Just to, through the chair, to Mr. Consiglio's point about what are you voting? Are you voting my recommendation? That I would not want you to vote something other than the manager's recommendation. The budget process is a process that it's not done in a vacuum. We work very closely together. I've made my case. The manager makes his recommendations, but I fully support the manager's recommendations because I understand why they're done. I understand the situation we're in. And I know that any recommendation that would be made to put additional money really in any of these budgets, especially this fiscal year, to Ms. Harnos's point, with about $175,000, with about $175 of wiggle room, I'm comfortable with it. And the reason I'm comfortable with it is because the committee's aware. The committee's aware, the cases have been made, but I wouldn't want to see you vote a recommendation that was not the recommendation of the manager, because I'm aware of what the manager's recommendation is walking in here, so.
okay. I'm just a newbie trying to figure things out.
No, in nothing,
We wouldn't have seconded you, and then it would have became obvious.
Yeah, well, I don't need to embarrass myself. I can find other ways.
no, and nothing would prevent us down the line from you making a motion to
Right.
reopen it, and we could re-examine it down the road if there was additional stuff. But usually those are in discussion with the CFO, town manager, to, maybe something has changed. But no, it's a great point. We're not just here to rubber stamp things, but to the chief's point, we listen to their concerns so that we know when these things come up, we have a better understanding. Chief, can you just, I know you mentioned at the beginning, just the timing of the new hires. Can you just explain? I understood you, but now that we've had all this overtime discussion, now I'm trying to re-understand it again.
Sure. So at the fall town meeting, they appropriated the hiring of 4 new people for January 1. But the reality is the timing between fall town meeting, by the time we advertise, interview, all of those things, January 1 is sort of it's not a realistic start date. So we were not able to we didn't really have a good response to the first couple of postings. So we actually had to post again. So now we're kind of, as we were pushing into February, we didn't even have candidates. We were still advertising. So we got through the process. We made conditional offers to people for an April 8th start. But knowing the overtime situation that we're in, I had $85,000 set aside. I'm looking to transfer about 72 of that 85 right now. Because there is the possibility with one of the candidates that we're looking at that we may be able to bring that person on sooner than July 8th that has a little bit of experience that may be able to make a little more of an impact to a group right away. So I set aside, out of the 85 that I had available, I set aside about 10 weeks of pay, to finish the fiscal year. So I'm looking to transfer the 72, which is the balance of those other 5 positions. So, and again, when we bring people on, we do a 2-week orientation right out of the gate. We do 1 week of fire, 1 week of EMS. So after that 2 weeks, they're in a better position to go to their working groups. They sort of all get the department overview and the same information in that orientation. It's not impossible, but it's hard to do an orientation with what we do with one person, right? So when the deputy and I were talking about trying to still close this overtime gap in this fiscal year, the conversation was, listen, we could bring these people on April 8th, but the reality is that it's going to cost us more money to bring them on April 8th, because if we're going to do an orientation, I got to pay supervisors to do an orientation. And then the people that we're bringing on with their experience level, they're not going to count towards the shift to try to be able to stop the bleeding on overtime. So really, all we're doing is putting ourselves in a bigger overtime hole by running the orientation in April and paying 2 weeks of overtime pay to run the orientation. So what we did was we said, and then I still have 2 vacancies outside of those other positions. So what we said was, we're going to move the April 8th group out to July 8th with the other 2 vacancies. So, because we were going to bring on 4 April 8th and 2 July 8th. We just made the decision and said, we're going to move the 4 out to July 8th, and we're going to bring all 6 on at the same time. That way we can utilize a portion of that money for overtime, and it's going to make that orientation go a little more seamless with 5 or maybe 6 people in it versus doing it twice, 4 and 2. So we're eliminating 1 2-week orientation, and we're just kind of getting it into one.
Do we have any concern we lose some of those people in the 3 months?
Nope. I've talked with all of them. They're all set. They were not under any constraint or immediate. So that's already been talked to, and they are still on board for July 8th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Motion to recommend.
Second.
Let me just read the amount into the record for the.
No, I'm talking about the budget.
Yeah, I'm going to read the budget numbers.
Sorry.
That's all right. No. Just for the fire department total, the department requested $5,244,978. Town manager's recommendation, $5,143,268, an increase of $406,636.
Motion to recommend.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Chief, we've had you for a while, Deputy Chief. but-
No, that's okay. Before,
Do CIP.
Do CIP.
yeah, before we jump into capital, I just want to bring something to the committee's attention that may have an impact, will have an impact on the budget, either next fiscal year, the earliest, or maybe the following fiscal year, is I just want to bring attention, and I've notified town administration of this. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which Massachusetts was not an OSHA state up until a few years ago on the municipal side. They were always on the private side, but recently on the municipal side. So OSHA currently has under review a new proposed rule, which is 1910, which will replace the existing, what they call fire brigade standard, that has been in place since 1980 with no changes. So the fire side of OSHA has not been looked at or changed in 40 years. So some of the highlights that are going to be required from organizations is we're going to have to be mandated to do more pre-incident planning on our target hazard buildings. We're going to be required to have a formal written plan on how we will deliver emergency services to the community. Training will play a large role in these amendments, both in initial training, ongoing training, refresher training, also professional and leadership development. There's a safety and health requirement that will require a department it's going to mandate a health and fitness program within the department. Also under the safety and health, they're pushing for, maybe you have seen some of the reports about PFAS and the use of PFAS in firefighter turnout gear and how that is contributing to increased cancer rates in firefighters. So there will most likely be a mandate to have non-PFAS turnout gear. It will, and then this is the part that gets a little sticky, and in all honesty, I think this is the part where it's going to be more of an ongoing, a recurring expense versus something like turnout gear, which would maybe be a one-time for a replacement. But again, these are all things that have to be gone through the bargaining process. But under physicals, they're talking about an annual fitness for duty screening. That would obviously have to be negotiated with the unions. And then the big one is, and again, just keep in mind, this is under a comment period. I serve on the board of directors for the Fire Chiefs Association of Massachusetts. I was on a conference call this week with the Department of Labor and other members of the executive board of FCAM, and we were talking about this issue. FCAM is going to provide written comment by May 6th on some of the things that we have concern about. And I think the thing that fire chiefs are most concerned about in this is, and this is the big one that we're watching, but the proposed language currently says that any firefighter that is exposed to more than 15 combustion events annually is going to be required to have a medical screening. Now, there's not a firefighter in our department that would be under 15 combustion events a year. So I think this is the one that has grabbed the attention of most fire chiefs across the country. We have a lot of questions on this. Nothing is definitive. Massachusetts, once adopted by the federal government, has a 24-month implementation period. So this is anticipated to be voted on this year. So worst case scenario, which according to the
Calendar year?
the federal government this calendar year will vote this thing up or down one way or another. And then Massachusetts DLS, which they indicate that they're willing to work with us, is they'll probably utilize the full 24-month implementation period. So we're potentially 3 years out from this best case scenario. But it's important to bring it to the committee's attention that in the next couple of years, depending how this shakes out federal, with the feds, there could be some additional expenses. Now, the good news is when you look at the list, and again, you have to consider that OSHA is trying to bring fire departments across the nation up to a standard. And we're talking about departments that maybe employ 7 people with 1 truck in a volunteer department that serves 100 people somewhere to the city of New York, right? And everything in between. So the good news is when you look at the list of things that are required, we're in very good shape. We're doing a lot of these things now. A lot of this is not news. I read some of them and I say, oh my God, I can't believe that there's departments that are not doing this now. We've been doing this for 20 years, right? But you got to understand the vastness of it. But there are certainly things in there that we're not doing, not by any way, not by any negligence or whatever, but they're new. These are new proposed things that will have a financial impact. Now, the big one, it revolves around the health stuff with physicals and things like that. But as you know, another thing that is paid for through ambulance receipts is every couple of years, you'll see us put an article on town meeting. Usually it's around $25,000 for medical screenings for our personnel, and that's paid for through ambulance receipts. Essentially, that's what OSHA is looking to do. They're looking for more frequent screenings of members to protect things. I can tell you that every nickel that we have invested into our medical screening program in the 3 years that we have been doing it here has paid off dividends. I can tell you tonight, and I obviously can't get into details, but I can share that in the 3 years that we have been doing this program, it's all about early detection. It's about early detection for cancer and early detection for heart. In the 3 years that we've been doing this program, we have had early detection of 4 members with cancer who have been treated, myself included. Early detection on cardiac issues that have been rectified. These are all things that ultimately, number one, first and foremost, it's for the safety of our members and it's for early detection so they live long and healthy lives and have good careers. But there is a cost savings measure to this as well, because if we can detect cancer in someone early and save their life, it also, it falls on the other end where less coverage, less medical bills, less expenses. So the $25,000 that we've been appropriating every couple of years, we've picked up many things with our members that they are then directed to get follow-up care with their own physicians, and we've caught a lot of things. But, I think when you're talking about cancer in the fire service, when you're talking about a department that has 45 members and you've had 4 members of the department discovered with cancer in 3 years, right? That's sort of, on a global scale, it's somewhat of an it's kind of a big percentage, in a small department. So we're doing a lot of these things now. I'm never going to balk at safety-related things, but it is important for the Finance Committee members to know that that is something that's on the horizon.
CIP, do you want to highlight? I know, again,
Sure. If you want to pass this around again, I brought all kinds of gifts for you all tonight. So just, quickly, just explain sort of how we look at our CIP. If I can find my CIP, where is it? So what I'm passing around is we take a look at our capital and forecast it out to 20 to 21 years. Normally, it's a 20-year capital, but depending on if a particular piece of equipment on the 5-year, will fall into another fiscal year, it goes anywhere from 20 to 21 years, depending on the thing. But call it, for argument's sake, it's a 20-year capital replacement. Our capital is pretty straightforward. The bulk of our capital is vehicles. Right on the top, it explains, the strategy is we keep an engine for 15 years. We try to keep our ambulances for 9. I can tell you that with the current ordering process and, supply chain and all of that, we have 2 ambulances on the road right now that are 1 and 2 years past what we would have normally kept them for, but we have no choice just because of how the ordering thing. If we order an ambulance today, it is 3 years before we see that new ambulance. So I know it was talked about a little earlier tonight, Mr. Jones brought it up, that when you're voting on the CIP, you're voting for a 5-year package. That's important because if we want something to arrive in 29, we have to be really placing an order for that in 26 or 27. So we need to know that we have that commitment for the overall plan in order to have vehicles arriving, in a time for them to rotate. And it's 4 years for a fire truck. So a fire truck that hits the 5-year capital, really, when it's approved, the truck's getting ordered the following year so we can have it, when it really comes on the 5th year. And this is a huge change. I mean, 20 years ago, it was 6-7 months delivery for a custom-built ambulance, and you could have a fire engine in about a year, So it's just, everything has just changed so dramatically. So again, we try to keep the ambulances for 9 years, a ladder truck every 25 years, heavy rescue every 20, tanker every 20. So our tanker truck is turning 20 years old this summer. We have a new tanker truck on order, so we'll take delivery of our new tanker in July. And then as far as cars go, this was another thing, that was brought up in that social media post. And again, the point that was not, you asked if that was because that was not anything that you said or whatever. There was somebody that posted just outrageous statements about what police and fire actually had for fleet. And I ignore 90% of that stuff, but I gotta be honest, I'm just getting really tired of the mistruth that goes on, especially with social media. And I ignore 90% of it. That one I just couldn't ignore. Because it's not true. And at the end of the day, right, that's why I said, don't let the facts get in the way of a good rumor. The reality is that we've had the same amount of fire equipment that we've had for the most part since the 60s. Since the 60s, we've had one ladder truck, we've had one rescue truck, we've had one forestry truck, we've had a chief's car, a deputy's car, a fire inspector's car. We've had all of those things for 40 years, right? In the last 40 years, we've increased the total count of our vehicles, our small vehicles, by 4. 4 vehicles in 40 years is what we've grown. We added a second fire inspector, we hired an EMS coordinator, we hired a fleet mechanic, and we have a training car that people use to go back and forth to training, right? So, to turn around and just say that, again, not to get on this vehicle thing, but, it's not reality, so that was the point of that. But we typically, the only new cars that we buy, we don't always buy, what we do is we buy new cars, like the chief and deputy usually get new cars, and then fire prevention gets new cars, and then training, EMS, all of those other vehicles, those are the hand-me-downs from those others. So we buy a new chief's car every 5 years, but then the chief's car goes to EMS to replace their car. We buy a deputy's car every 5 years. His car replaces something else. So the number of brand new cars that we're buying, there's really only, it's the chief deputy and the 2 fire prevention vehicles. The rest of the vehicles that are in the fleet are all the hand-me-downs from those 4. And, when it comes to the types, we purchase the vehicles based on the type. It's another thing that people say, well, I don't know why can't you have a smaller this or a smaller that? It's for functional use. The reason that we went to the Tahoes is slightly different than the reason that the police went to the Tahoes is, the back of our vehicles, when you open up the back of our Tahoes, those have mobile command posts in the back. It's full of radios, it's full of equipment, it's full of everything. With the Explorers, we tried the Explorers for a few years. The problem is neither him or I can stand underneath the hatch of an Explorer. That's where we command incidents from. So when we get to incidents, we pop the hatch, we stand at the back of our command post. That's where our radios are. That's where our accountability boards are. We can't, the Ford Explorer has such a low profile, it's too small of a vehicle to serve as a command post. There's a 4 to 5 inch height difference in the tailgate of the Tahoe. So you could actually stand underneath it and work. And you can fit more equipment. I mean, he was busting he carries a little more equipment than I do, but he was busting at the seams in his Explorer. But at the end of the day, when you're underneath the hatch of your Ford Explorer at a fire and you got to do this because you can't stand up straight under the command post, it doesn't work. So the types of vehicles that we purchase, whether it's a fire truck, a rescue, or a command car, the type of vehicle that we purchase is what fits the need for the function that it's doing. Not necessarily what's compact, compact and what we do doesn't mix. Those two things really don't jive. So that's kind of the flow. So you can just see here that, again, most of its vehicles, SCBA. We were fortunate to get an SCBA grant maybe 10 years ago. I think we got $350,000 from a federal grant to buy all new SCBA. We're certainly, when it comes time in fiscal 30, we're going to start writing grants probably around 27, 28, 29 in hopes to get federal money to replace those. But again, that federal money right now is hanging in the balance. I'll actually be traveling to Washington, D.C. at the end of April to testify in D.C. and speak to our legislators to try to get them to re-up the AFG and SAFER grants because there's sunset clauses on those bills. And if they are not renewed this year, they're gone forever. So, so hopefully we'll be able to get grants, but and the reason that I bring up SCBA is because it's a large expenditure. That'll probably be somewhere around a $300,000 or a $400,000 expenditure. That's typically what our larger vehicles are going for. But one of the questions that's asked sometimes is with SCBA's is that something that we can do over a multi-year thing? Can we buy maybe a half a dozen this year, half a dozen next year, and kind of phase it in? The SCBA, which is the self-contained breathing apparatus, that's the device firefighters wear on their back where they get their air supply. It is by far the number one safety device that a firefighter has. Okay. I equate the SCBA to the firearm of a police officer. If a police department is going to replace their firearms, they don't replace 6 guns a year, because that's a safety issue. If we don't have compatibility with officers between magazines and training and all of those things, that's a safety issue. I put SCBA in the same category. Technology changes all the time. If I have 4 different versions of SCBA in the organization that has their safety devices in different places, depending on what version air pack you're wearing, that's a major safety issue. So phasing in air bottles, that's one thing. Phasing in the actual packs themselves, it has to be 100%. This is what we're moving to, because now we're training to that standard, that pack, those safety features. That's how you use this device. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the layout for like what the rotation looks like. And then you can see what's in the 5-year capital here for 25, it's just some existing lease payments. It's year 1 of the new tanker truck that we'll be taking delivery of in July. That, and then it's $400,000 for a replacement ambulance that we'll have this summer. That's coming through ambulance receipts as indicated. And then the rest are just, so with the exception of the ambulance and the new tanker on year 1, the rest are existing lease payments for vehicles.
My only question would be, they've replaced, again, similar to when the police were up, can you, because it's already been in gear, what's going on with Marine? It's not like we're a city on the shore. So I'm just
A
trying.
Marine is a boat. It's a boat. So we have 2 boats in the department. We have a 20-foot Boston Whaler that's a dive boat. It's set up for divers to deploy. And then we have a 15-foot inflatable boat. It's basically, it's an inflatable with a small motor, but they're designated as Marine.
Got it.
Any other questions on CIP? No, Chief, thank you. I mean, I think, again, the level of transparency, I know that at those posts out of frustration with the misinformation, but I think, all in all, I think they ended up being good things.
Absolutely.
The supporting documents, you know, this is tremendous, and I don't know what if these are late editions, but anything like that could get uploaded to, you know, to the website, I think is important for the residents to be able to look at stuff like that. I think that is,
And again, that 20-year document, that kind of actually had a major overhaul this year. That, you know, everything is fluid, just like the 5-year capital, the 20-year capital is fluid as well. You will see there's one thing on the capital this year. So you'll see it on the 20-year, but you're not going to see it on here because it's not part of our capital. But in this fiscal year, we're hoping to have the parking lot, the back parking lot at fire headquarters repaved. But that money is in an account within the DPW for refinishing municipal parking lots. The manager had requested the DPW director look at amending this year's to not pave Camp Gleason and pave the back of headquarters to tie that in with the construction of the new pedestrian footbridge and all of that. So we're hoping to have the back parking lot repaved through the DPW funds.
and the last piece, I think, and we'll talk when we get to the fleet maintenance stuff, but I think the departments have done a great job working in conjunction with DPW to better manage and track the maintenance of the fleet, because it is a very front-facing piece and expensive piece for the taxpayer. So knowing that after these purchases are made, that we're doing our due diligence to ensure they last as long as they can and remain safe vehicles for the employees of the town.
I never would have imagined, and the police chief and the deputy police chief can tell you, like, I never would have fathomed the amount of energy and hours that goes into managing a fleet program. You know, there's corporations that have the same amount of vehicles that we do that have people dedicated to just fleet maintenance, like the management of it, not even the fixing. And so I agree. I think we do a very good job with the knowledge that we have to manage, you know, the fleets that we have. It's a lot of work. There's a lot that goes into it, and I never would have imagined the complexity of managing a fleet, but we do the best we can. I also want to echo, you know, the police chief. You know, we say it publicly all the time, but we do truly appreciate the support that we receive from every level of government here, including the finance committee. And you're always very supportive. It's always good to see you all. So thank you very much.
I don't think I think you've already sort of highlighted the one transfer that,
Yeah, we've talked it to death, so motion to
let's,
recommend.
I would prefer we stop talking about it. So I'm with Mr. Jones.
Motion to approve.
And second.
well, do we want to just, in order for the, stay with the agenda, let's just cover emergency management. I think we'll be all set with you.
Oh, did we not?
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So why don't we move on to emergency management? That is number 291?
Yeah, it's right after
291 in your book? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's 291.
81.
This is no changes from last year. It's a level funded budget. FY '24 was, emergency total was 17,500. Amount requested by the department, again, 17,500, and town manager, same recommendations. I know, Sharon, you said the Eric Artisan was invited but was not able to be here due to a conflict. Not that he didn't want to be here with us, so. Any questions relative to this one? If Karen could answer them, but if you had any, but I think it's, you know, it's a pretty standard budget. If there's no questions,
Second.
a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
And that concludes our budgets for this evening. We'll move on to transfers. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, if I could just, I wanted to mention something because of the conversation that the fire chief brought up about OSHA stepping in on 1910. You know, there are some things, and we've talked to the town manager about this. I'm sort of doing this through you to the town accountant. And it was just within this budget season where we try to separate some of the costs because it identifies a specific amount of personnel. The cost is attributed to that department. But if something like this 1910 and this OSHA takes off, not only now are you having to do physicals and things for individuals when you're onboarding them, but you're going to have to cycle them in because you're going to be mandated depending on how many circumstances or other things come up. So giving the complexity, I know that's down the road, but in an effort, I would like to maybe put on I would just like to draw that to the town manager's attention. Again, I don't know if that is through you or if it's not this budget season, because obviously we've got a product in place that we're working with and all of it's intact in there. But I would like to maybe at another time, once the budget is moved forward, get it on the agenda to talk again as a committee, knowing what we know now going forward. It just seems like there's so many people that are, have to go through these physicals and have other types of things that have to happen before they get hired. And I think your point earlier, if I heard you right, was we've got a department incurring an expense, and then that's hard to justify if the person doesn't pass it and make it. Because we're looking at a $10,000 line item, 5 people, all of a sudden no one's been hired. Somebody comes back and says, why are we having to give 5 more people a physical at $10,000, and then we have to disclose the fact, well, the other 5 didn't work out, which sort of isn't something we should be sharing, because they're not they weren't hired. So I just wanted to say that in light of tonight's 2 departments that were critical, that it's something that I think we might want to.
And to your point, I mean, the fire chief has his perspective on how that's going to impact his department. There may be other departments that are impacted by those new OSHA regulations.
Right.
DPW and such. So yeah, it would be, if it's going to have a significant budget impact in future fiscal years.
Well, I just think that, to your comment, what triggered it was that it's an onboarding event. And if we're onboarding staff and we're in that process, which is an HR function, and we're going to, because there has to be some accountability between the departments that are doing their budgets and the communication that they have with the town management, whether it be human resources or the town manager. And so with that said, I think it does merit the fact that they should in some way sort of corral it so we have a better idea logistically. I mean, at some point, they're not just reporting to us that they're down staff or that they're hiring or that they're testing, they're having to communicate that, the other parties, whether it's the HR manager or the town manager or the CFO, they're well aware of it before it even gets to us. So I don't think that it necessarily has to be contained in their budget, because I think it's part of the hiring process. Or it's becoming clear to me, there's some things that you want to separate into some departments, but because of the attention that all of this onboarding is getting, I think we want to think about maybe if we want to recategorize it.
And probably, I had thought when someone had mentioned backgrounds tonight, I'm like, oh, that's another component of that onboarding is various levels and degrees of backgrounds depending on what departments they're going to. Is that an HR function before it even gets into a department budget as well? So
It isn't the department making the determination on what and how and where they advertise and who they send the testing to. Like, it seems to me that's still more of a management within the department
I think
function as opposed to a generic payroll, which is sort of after the fact.
It's not payroll, it's human resources. So
Right.
human
Human
resources is, I believe, the ultimate face between the employee being sought and the applicant and the job coming in. So most times, you're not going to get an ad out into somewhere. You're not going to be seeking someone until it's got HR approval, because that's part of their job, to make sure that the communication that's going out into the masses is accurate and correct. They get their information from the department, but I think in some cases, I can't speak for the police or fire or DPW. In some of them, they may be allowed to put that ad out there. But I've got to think just from regulatory issues, that it's got to be blessed by town management, meaning the town manager or the HR director or something like that. Because they're not generalists. They're people that know their specialty, like police. They know fire, but they may not know, gee, these are the parameters,
is
equal
what we can ask.
opportunity, watching the way you word something when you put it out into the paper.
They may not be that good at advertising either, since that's not really their wheelhouse.
Yes, and it is centralized through human resources, and I did write down that I wanted to check, because the human resource budget does have, there is a line item in there for medical exams, and I want to see if the dispatch is also covered through that. So it would be better to be consolidated under the umbrella of HR.
Or are we duplicating efforts, or both departments?
Correct, yes.
Funds in to cover the same function, so.
Well, I would think the HR director would have to come in before us and say, she's got, 17 departments and she's got a total of anticipation of, 64 new hires next year because of turnover and retirement and stuff like that. And they would get that information because it would be communicated to them when the departments are doing their budgets. It just, instead of it appearing in theirs, because that's sort of like the CIP budget. I just feel like we're getting piecemealed when we're really our part of our responsibility is the big picture. It's not just the detail which we're looking at, but the big picture and to see if the big picture is going smooth. And for me, I think I'd rather hear that next year we're looking at 19 openings or retirees or different things like that, and what it's going to take to onboard and seek out those, than to hear 2 from this department, 3 from that department, 1 from this department, 4 from that department. It's harder to look at the broad scope of things.
Maybe since we've already sort of approved the HR and the HR director wasn't able to be here, but maybe as on one of the slower nights or towards the end before we sort of wrap up our season, just so that the HR director could give us sort of a wider overview, not necessarily this fiscal year, but beyond how they envision. And unfortunately, we saw our position cut out of that budget, which is just a thought.
Makes sense.
Okay. Anything else, General? We'll get to that transfer. Okay, let's do it. I like it. So transfer, we have a transfer request from the fire department, which I already discussed. Interdepartmental transfer coming from the firefighter salary account. Amount requested $72,228. This one is going to the overtime account. The present balance in that firefighter account is $84,524.35. And the reason given, anticipated shortfall in account.
Before I recommend this, because I'd like to, I just wanted a point of clarity. When they were here speaking with us, there's a difference of about $12,000 left. And I believe he said that he was encumbering 10 because of bringing on possibly somebody in April or May, a 10-week period. Is that to lead me to believe then that this remaining amount is sort of gone already, if I understand it? Because what if they need to come back for more?
We would have to probably seek out another account if he is going to anticipate an additional salary for that short window. Some of them may have already had some training experience, if I understood that. So that would,
We would have to go to the reserve or try to find,
Salary reserve.
yeah, or try to find some other accounts.
And again, I just.
Within the
wanted to
overall
make sure I
budget.
heard him correctly.
Yeah.
So that's really all I'm doing is
Yes.
clarifying. So motion to recommend.
Second.
motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, can we just change that to a motion
A
to
motion
approve
to
because it's a
approve,
transfer?
sorry.
Second.
A motion to approve in a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
It's late.
It's late.
It is late.
That's too tough, too tough.
This is a request for transfer from the reserve account.
Maybe
Norfolk Aggie one? In the back of it?
Yeah. It was, yep.
From Norfolk Agricultural School Finance. This one is the amount requested, $1,468.60. Reason for the shortage in the account, transportation assessment cost exceeded the estimated cost.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve, all in favor?
Aye.
Very good. If there's no questions on the transfers that the CFO approved that were up to that $250 amount, that'll be
We're good.
good. And if
We
there's no
need to set
question.
a time for the next meeting.
Yeah, so in minutes too, if there's no question on minutes, we'll consider those to be approved.
Yeah?
Time for the next meeting, do we have next Wednesday as well, right?
Yeah, next Wednesday is school department, library. It's on the back of your agenda. And
Thank you.
Yeah, school department, library, and cable.
I think we decided we did meet at 5:30.
And when the school department, has the school committee, are they getting that? Have they already gotten that for you? When do they meet?
That's a date they suggested.
Okay, so that
That's
should have
been
already,
set for a long
it should have already been before the school committee and approved.
I believe it was, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then while we're on that, do we know, Sharon, if the Bay Path is committed yet, or is that still just a place marker?
On April 3rd, is that the date?
Yeah,
Yes, I've spoken to the superintendent.
and they're hoping to be ready? Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
5:30 on March 20th then, right?
5:30 on the 20th. Next Wednesday. Okay, there's no other questions. I'll take a motion to adjourn if we're,
It's you.
Motion to adjourn?
a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Very good, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.